Welcome back. All right, so since it's been a very busy off season, I thought, why don't I just do an overview? And we'll look at the Pacific first. I'll do one tomorrow on the Central, etc., etc. And just look at what teams have done so far and just stick to like big changes, or some of these are players I haven't talked about that have signed with new teams. But since so much has happened, it might be hard to follow. I figured, you know what? Why not do this? So we'll go in alphabetical order. We'll start in Anaheim. I'm wearing the Ducks because it's going to be in Anaheim in a month. They've added Harkins. They've added Meyer. This is not a team that is going to be adding big names, obviously. They are 31st currently in terms of odds of winning the Stanley Cup, and 32nd right down here. So Pacific, still at the bottom. I do think that the Ducks are still in the midst of a rebuild. It should start getting better. Same as for San Jose. The biggest exit they've had is Max Jones, who went to Boston. Anaheim won't be any weaker than they were last season. They should be stronger. But this is a gradual build. And so gradual builds mean just those incremental steps. So for Anaheim fans saying when are games going to get important again, it may be a couple of years. For Calgary, Calgary's going into the rebuild. So you'll notice I have rebuilding. Calgary currently has the 27th best odds of winning the Stanley Cup in 2025. They've added Kirkland on a two-way contract. Lomberg, Firk. So if you're wondering where's Martin Firk been, he's right there. Devin Cooley added for some depth in net, and Anthony Mantha added up front as well. So how many of these players will be gone by the deadline? We shall see. One question mark currently with Calgary is Nazem Kadri, and whether or not he may end up being on the move before we get to the regular season. So is that pending? We'll know, I would think, maybe by the end of July we'll have a good idea of whether or not he's staying with the team, because, rumors leak out and all that. But there was talk about Kadri potentially being moved by the team. Teams calling about Kadri, and Calgary's made it clear that they're open for business. I don't know if it's going to be a full rebuild. I think there's still a good roster there to just do a retool. But yeah, so Calgary, not in the same position as Edmonton. They have the best odds right now with the odds makers for the 2025 Cup. They've added Jeff Skinner, Victor Arvidsson, Connor Carrick, Colin Delia for some depth in net, and Josh Brown added as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the question mark will be Skinner and Pickard. Is that a tandem that's going to win you a Stanley Cup? The answer Edmonton would give you right now is it got them within one game of potentially winning the Stanley Cup, so they're fine with it. We shall see. The biggest loss that they've had, Fogle. And one of the reasons I didn't really have anybody for the biggest loss for Calgary is they got rid of all their UFAs at the deadline, so they didn't really lose anybody of consequence in the offseason thus far. But Warren Fogle being gone for Edmonton, I've seen people saying that my praise of the Fogle contract is wrong, but Fogle gives you an honest effort every night. It's not just about goals and points in the National Hockey League. Not anymore. If you watch this year's playoffs, you know shot suppression, hard work, being able to go out and sacrifice your body on the play is really important. Fogle's that kind of guy. So he goes to LA. Arvidsson, of course, being added from LA, so it's kind of like a trade. Arvidsson needs to stay healthy is the issue, but yeah, I think Skinner, probably 25 goals. Arvidsson, if he stays healthy, you might get 25 goals there. I think it's understandable. Edmonton right now are considered to have strong odds of winning the Stanley Cup. The LA Kings are tied for 12th in the odds with the Vancouver Canucks. So Vancouver and LA in that same spot. I know Canuck fans are going to be mad about that, but we'll get to it. For LA, there might be Kings fans looking at that with the offseason they've had and saying, I don't know, that might be generous to give them 12th as the basically the ranking of the odds, which goes by how people are betting, right? Matt Roy, to me, is the biggest loss for them. I went back and forth between Arvidsson and Roy, and I thought, I'll put Matt Roy down. He goes to Washington, of course. He was already in LA, so I'll just go ahead and change that to Washington. I'll throw some ninja dust at the camera there so people don't know that happened. And, yeah, I'll just put Washington right there. So Caleb Jones has been added. Studnicka has been added. Fogle and Edmondson. So some may not know that Studnicka signed there. Of course, he spent most of last season in the AHL. Edmondson, people have complained about that contract, that it might be too high. I'm not going to say it's not too high, but again, for LA, we'll see how it goes this season. There's some pressure on Rob Blake to build this team into a contender sooner rather than later. Then we get to San Jose, and right now, as I said, 32nd in terms of odds of winning the Stanley Cup. They've added Josh Mahura. They added Delandria. I went ahead to Seattle. Apologies. just when you get older, your eyes go, let's just skip to the bottom. So like I'll just skip to Vegas and just I'm just kidding. Delandria, Grunstrom, Wenberg, and Toffoli. San Jose clearly wanting to have a more veteran roster this year than last year and a little more talented than the one last year too. They're still rebuilding, of course. To me, the biggest loss is Kevin Labanc, although he's still a UFA, so technically he could still re-sign with San Jose. It's interesting too because it doesn't feel like it's that long ago that Labanc was a pretty darn good player. I wouldn't be surprised to see him end up getting a tryout in September, and I wouldn't be surprised if he earns himself at the very least a league minimum contract with whichever team gives him a tryout. Now we get to Seattle and Josh Mahura being added. Stevenson, Lajoie. So if you're wondering where Lajoie went, he's in Seattle. And Montour. Of course, Montour and Stevenson, huge contracts for them. The biggest loss they suffer is Tatar going to New Jersey. Tatar, though, after a pretty good start with Seattle, quieted down quite a bit. Seattle's currently got the 22nd highest odds of winning the Stanley Cup. I think Seattle is probable for a bounce back from a down year last year. I do. So I put them as a wild card push. So I have LA as a playoff team, maybe a wild card push for Seattle. I don't know that they end up top 3, but they surprised us, not this past season obviously, but the year before, so maybe they can surprise us again. And then we get to Vancouver. So for Vancouver, they've added Heinen, Sherwood, Patera, Desharnais, Forbert, and DeBrusk. And DeBrusk, I think the cap hit's fine. I'm concerned with the term a little bit, but the cap hit's fine. Heinen's a good player. He works hard. Sherwood, one of the hardest working players anytime he's out on the ice. I think Canuck fans are going to love Sherwood right out of the gate. Patera gives them some depth in goal. Desharnais gives them some depth on the blue line, as does Forbert. Forbert on a third pairing doesn't really hurt you so much. He's not going to be a world beater. He's not a guy who's going to wow you every night, but he should be a pretty good addition for the Canucks. I do still see them as a playoff team. And the thing is, yes, them winning the division may very well have just been they were on a heater that first half of the season. And they're not going to be able to do that again. But I still think they're a playoff team. And Zadorov is, I think, the biggest loss, both physically and just in the locker room, too. But with the contract he signed in Boston, I don't know that Canuck fans would have liked that either. It's a pricey contract with some term there. And so we'll see how it ages for Boston. But it is Boston's deal. I would put Zadorov as a more impactful loss than Lindholm. Even though Lindholm had a really good playoff, Zadorov was pretty much good right from his first shift on in Vancouver. Then we get to Vegas. So one of the biggest downgrades, I think, over the last year has been Vegas. They win the Cup in 2023. Now they've lost Marchessault, and that hurts. Marchessault, that's going to hurt them. It feels like their identity in that first year as the Misfits was huge. And every year since then, they've lost that a little bit more. Now, they did win the Stanley Cup in 2023, so they don't care. But I do wonder if we're going to start to see now the regular season numbers start to tail off a little bit. So in the offseason, they've added Schmid. They've also added Haig. So now they've got both defensemen named Haig, Nick Haig and Robert Haig. Spelled different, but pronounced basically the same. Samsonov added for some depth in goal. So you have Schmid, you have Samsonov, you have Aiden Hill. We'll see how that all pans out. Aston Reese added. Of course, he's been a farmhand mostly, as has Lazinski. Tanner Lazinski signing with Vegas as well. So for Vegas, I do think that there's something else that's going to come up with Vegas before the season starts. But Vegas is also a team that if this starts to go south early in the season, look for a move to get made. Vegas is not going to go quietly into that good night. I do have them as a playoff team, which means I've got 3 teams labeled as playoff teams. One is a contender and one is a wild card push. We'll see. And again, in green, I think that's the expectation. You guys can let me know if you feel like the expectations are different. If you feel like the expectations in Seattle are going to be playoffs, let me know your thoughts on that. But I thought this was something fun to do. It's off season, so I will do the Central Division tomorrow. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.